Hello, everybody. This is Editing Vivian, just popping in at the beginning to warn anyone who might be driving at the moment of listening to this podcast at about 11 minutes in, and I think scattered throughout the rest of the podcast occasionally as well. You can hear some sirens on Holly's side of the recording. Sorry! Hello, and welcome to I'm a Fan of That, podcast about all things fandom told through objects, stories, and studies, with a bit of silliness along the way. Your hosts on this journey are pop culture writer, journalist, and cosplay expert, Holly Swinyard, and myself, Vivian Asimos, a public anthropologist and pop culture academic with a PhD in religion and popular culture. Join us as we wander down the incredible and intriguing path into fan culture, its history, the people who make it up, and the way that we look at this ever-growing part of our society. Fair warning, we may talk about some adult themes, use some adult language, and possibly get a little bit nerdy about the whole thing. You have been warned.
Hi, welcome to I'm a Fan of That, and I'm going to start laughing again in a minute because Vivian is staring at me. Welcome to I'm a Fan of That, the podcast all about fandom through the objects that we love, where we take a look at the wonderful, wacky world of fan culture and everything that goes alongside it. My name is Holly Swinyard. I'm a pop culture writer, author, and now it turns out games writer. When did that happen? I know, new job. Woo! And my co-host is...
I'm Vivian Asimos. I'm a freelance academic and pop anthropologist.
That's exciting. We're talking about something odd, interesting, objectless today. I didn't really know how to object this. Other than bring up a DVD collection from where it's stored, because I still have DVDs. And that is anime, reboots, and general storytelling. So we're kind of focusing on anime because we're nerds, but I kind of want to talk about reboots in general because there has been so many reboots in the last few years. For some reason, Disney, why? But I think this particularly happened because I watched the Trigun reboot. And I'm a big fan of Trigun. One of my first, if I put in inverted commas, proper anime that wasn't like Pokemon. Pokemon's proper anime, but you know what I mean. One that I felt, it was in Japanese when I watched it, all that kind of stuff. So it kind of felt more valid in my baby nerddom, which is a ridiculous thing to say, but it still holds this kind of funny place in my heart and my learning of nerd culture. And you love Trigun as well, so this was a good one to pick.
Similarly, Trigun was a very early anime for me. I don't know if it was like a super first one. I did watch it dubbed because that was the only anime I could get a hold of when I was younger. Was what showed up on Adult Swim.
Oh god, yeah.
And they were always dubbed. And I think it aired after Cowboy Bebop or something.
So I watched it because I had very nerdy, right? So when I was about 15, 16 or whatever, and I was getting into anime and comics and stuff in general, coming out of my Doctor Who phase and into my I'm gonna like this other nerdy shit phase, my local library had a librarian who was super into all of this, and she used to go to Japan and stuff a lot, so she used to run a club once a month where she would show anime and talk about it and get manga books in for us to read and educate people about Japan. And it was awesome. So that's why I watched it in Japanese with subtitles, because she had brought the DVD from Japan and then region hacked it somehow. We won't ask. So that we could all watch it, which was really cool because we had a big projector and stuff. But yeah, this is the nerdy shit that I did as a teenager. That's why nobody was my friends. No. But yeah, so that I never really saw any of it on TV because A, we didn't have Sky or anything in my house, and B, they only showed the Pokemon and the Digimons on BBC or CITV or whatever it was on Saturdays, and so those were the only ones I got to saw, apart from Cardcaptor Sakura, which would have just been Cardcaptors in the UK because that was also shown. But I didn't even watch Sailor Moon till I was older because it just wasn't... I didn't have Cartoon Network or anything, so...
See, I grew up on Sailor Moon. But we also had... the whole TV and how TV works is very different in the United States. And so I grew up in the United States, for people who don't know or can tell by me talking. So it, I think it was just a very different landscape. But yeah, we had Cartoon Network, and so we were able to watch a lot of that stuff. I grew up watching Sailor Moon, so anime's been around me for a really, really long time. But I think also, love it.
In the UK, we already had things like the Moomins has always been really popular, but the Japanese anime of the Moomins was super popular in the UK in the 90s, and a lot of my friends who did have Cartoon Network loved Sailor Moon and loved all of that kind of thing. So I think anime was becoming popular in the UK, but we had, like you said, we had a different setup for how people watch TV.
Yeah.
So you just would have like Saturday morning cartoons, or like a lot of the American ones, so the Powerpuff Girls and all that kind of stuff. I would say that probably like one of the biggest, most watched ones that was I would now include as anime, but it's difficult to say was Avatar: The Last Airbender. That was so popular, and that would have been when I was in my late teens. But also, we had like the video games, so Final Fantasy and everything. That would have been kind of, I guess, the into Japanese culture for me would have been through video games rather than necessarily through anime. Even like Final Fantasy is getting reboots. We're rebooting the video games, guys. Like,
yeah, it's reboot central.
I've literally finished playing the reboot of Resident Evil 4, one of my favourite video games of all time, and I will give them credit. They did the reboot, remake, whatever it is, very well. It is good, but it does have some of my favourite things missing, which is sad. But this is not what we're talking about.
So Trigun. Trigun was one of my favorites, and still remains to be one of my favorites. And the reasoning why, it was goofy. But the other reason is, and I would normally say that this is a spoiler, but the reboot has made this not so much of a spoiler anymore. Yeah. But I'm a big plant person, as Holly might be able to tell behind me.
Yeah. I can see them.
And this is only a very small collection of what is throughout the whole house. And the idea of a plant guy who's actually just a plant alien was amazing.
He's such a pretty plant guy as well.
So I was always a big fan of plant guy.
I love you, Vash the Stampede. Oh. So the reboot, I have watched it all now. When we initially decided to do this episode, I hadn't watched it all, and so I think I was more angry about it at the time than I am now. The reboot is essentially a prequel leading into a reboot of the original series, which is going to be the second series. Which, as much as I'm like, yes, that's cool, and it's nice to see how some of these characters met, particularly Wolfwood and Vash, because I love their relationship so much, it does kind of remove the surprise twist of the ending that is the original Trigun, where you're like, oh shit, he's a plant guy. Oh my god, it was aliens, because you spend the whole of I feel like we can't spoil an anime that came out in the 90s at this point.
I know, I feel bad because it's so good. But my husband hasn't seen the original Trigun.
Well, he's not allowed to listen to this episode then. So.
And we bonded over anime when we first started thinking about dating kind of levels. We stayed up very late in one of the communal halls at our uni just chatting about anime for hours. So when I found out he hadn't seen Trigun, I was like, oh, we should watch it. But it's so hard to find the original Trigun right now. Like, it's been really difficult. And even before the reboot, it was really hard to find. And I think we managed to find it, and we watched like one episode. But, with anime, you have to do like 2 or 3 to get into it. And so he didn't really get as into it. So when we saw that there was a reboot, we were like, oh, this is cool. It might be a good way to like get you into it. And the very first episode basically shows you what was like in the last couple of episodes in the original series.
Yeah.
And the whole time I was like, what are they doing? What are they doing? Because I was like, to me, what I thought was really cool was the twist of the reveal and how it actually is. And I wanted him to experience that because he's really into good writing as well as really good animation. So the kind of old school animation he wasn't as big of a fan of. So I was hoping he'd attach to the writing, but then so the whole thing. And he wasn't a big fan of the new style animation in that one. He's not a big fan of that type of animation. So it was I hated the writing. I didn't think the writing was very good. We'll get into that. But also then the animation itself wasn't very good. And so we were all like, we watched I think the first 2 or 3 episodes, and then we were like, no, I just can't.
So I love the original, and my partner watched the new one with me and then watched the original afterwards and loves both, which is great because yay. And Egg is also a plant person, so that was exciting.
Yes.
And now they're just desperately being like, cosplay Vash. I'm like, yeah, I will, I'll get round to it. Jesus Christ. I'm just pleased because they made him slightly less tall in the new one so that I don't have to feel like I'm tiny Vash the Stampede. Because he's so tall. It's always been one of those things where I've always just been like, but I'd be so tiny. Anyway, I felt like they jumped the shark a bit in it because I was just like, the whole point was that you got the amazing twist, and I was the same. I was like, wait, why are they showing this at the beginning? That's so weird. This is the twist ending. And Egg was like, what? And I was like, yeah, this whole section that they've got in the first episode is what happens in like the last 2 or 3 episodes in the original. And you go from weird steampunk cowboy land to hyper sci-fi in about the space of 4 episodes.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait, what? And your whole brain just kind of explodes. And it's so good. And I just feel like, and I think it's actually something, having watched quite a few reboots and remakes of anime recently, that they do a lot. And I don't know why. And a part of me wonders whether it's because particularly shonen stuff has become very popular in the West, in inverted commas, in Europe and the UK and the US. And I'm wondering whether a lot of these anime reboots are pandering to that style of writing, which is what the new reboot of Trigun feels like. It feels very Monster of the Week. It feels very, we're just going to throw stuff at you and big action sequences and all this sort of stuff, which the original Trigun does have action sequences. They're not like this in the same way. Very much not. They're still cool. I really like them, but they're not, they don't feel quite so shonen-y. Shonen is a type of manga and anime in Japan that's specifically designed for teenage boys. And then you have shoujo, which is for teenage girls, which is what Sailor Moon and stuff are. And while obviously that's a generalization of the categories, everybody can enjoy them, you can see that thing of the stylization of your Dragon Ball Zs and your kind of... I'm now trying to think of another example that Monsters of the Week and does big epic fights over everything, but it's just Dragon Ball Z stuck in my head. Oh, Yu-Gi-Oh!
Naruto, I think.
Yeah. So, like, all of these kind of things, that's shonen, and, My Hero Academia and things like that. And then Trigun as far as I'm concerned, Trigun shouldn't be shonen. Trigun is a beast. It's part of a sort of just a category of, action-adventure storytelling, whereas shonen is very distinctly a thing, you know? And it's something that's become very, very distinct, I think, since the late noughties, early 2010s, is shonen as a category. And I'm sure there's some anime and manga scholars out there yelling at me that I'm wrong. But this is my experience of what it has felt like to see. And during that period, there was this very hyper sexualization of young women in shonen as well. Which, as much as that's got less, is still really present in things like both of us have an issue with how Meryl is portrayed in this.
Yes.
Considering how badass she is in the original. And I don't mean badass in like, oh my god, she's so bad. She's just fucking great. Like, every element of her character, even her flaws, are so human in the original. And in this, it's just like, oh, whiny little girl. And you're like, oh, fuck's sake.
Yeah.
I know you're trying to show her backstory and how she got to be that person, but, like, you didn't need to take everything away from her.
Yeah, not every strong woman has to start as a weak woman to be a strong woman. Some people can just be strong women, just like how some dudes can just be strong dudes. Yeah, and especially she doesn't need, like, a random guy to be there teaching her how to be the strong woman, because that just, it kind of felt like a disservice to her character in the original. I'm going to say now, I don't know how much of this was written by the original writer. I actually haven't seen any comment from them about it, so I don't want to say that that person wasn't involved or there wasn't choices made by them and all this sort of stuff, and this wasn't always what they had planned. But it definitely feels like there is a knowledge that a type of audience who are into shonen, who are into superhero movies and all this sort of stuff in a different culture are going to watch this. And there is a certain amount of, oh, but we want them to watch it too, and so we're going to do this. I don't think that's entirely true. I don't think it feels like that, but also, you know, there's got to be an audience for it in Japan as well. Yeah, I just think with the rise of things like Crunchyroll and stuff, that there is definitely an awareness of people outside of Japan engaging with anime and manga in a new way. I don't know. I definitely don't want it to feel like, well, they're just giving the West what they want, because that's not it at all. Absolutely not. You know, anime and manga are very distinctly a Japanese art form. They are their own thing. And they tell very different types of stories.
And I think that's why it's so obvious, or at least it feels so obvious with Trigun, that was a very distinct type of storytelling, that it switched to a different type of storytelling that fits more into that category of My Hero Academia and stuff like that. I don't know, it just really feels like that.
Yeah, it definitely, I mean, it felt like I was almost, like, if they hadn't called it Trigun, I would have just assumed it was a completely different show that had a very similar red cloak on the main character. Like,
yeah.
Like, that was, which, by the way, both forms of the red cloak are badass. I will give the reboot that.
Yeah. I have to say, the actual character designs for the reboot, particularly Knives, is incredible. I was just like, Knives, you crazy fucker. I love you. You're insane. You look amazing. And Vash looks great. I mean, Vash always looks great. It's kind of his gig, right? To look really cool. No, the designs are good. I mean, they didn't change much about the others, I have to say. I'm really hoping we get Millie. The fact that Millie isn't there, one of the major characters for the original series, is a real issue. So
yeah, that was kind of my big thing. So for people who haven't seen the original, it was that Meryl kind of went along with another woman, and it was two women. And she was a very not typical representation of women for the time. She was tall. She was kind of built, but she was also, instead of being the kind of strong, muscular figure, she was very kind and nurturing, which isn't, again, what you would typically see for that figure of woman in pop culture, particularly in anime. And I really liked how in the original the women were varied as well as interesting and dynamic in a way that wasn't typical.
The reboot definitely has a sausage fest thing going on.
Yeah, and so the fact that they essentially replaced her with a very quintessential, drunk, strong man to teach the young woman how to do things. It was one of those things where it was like, you're kind of missing some of the interesting aspects of it. That being said, I'm not the kind of person that's like, oh, you ruined my childhood type of thing.
No.
Like, that's not how I feel about stuff. I just did what I did in this case, which is like, oh, this sucks, and I stopped watching it. And that's kind of the extent of it. Like, old Trigun will always be there. And I think one of the benefits of living in the time that we live in is that it's really difficult for things to completely go away.
Yeah.
There's always going to be someone who recorded it off of something and has put it up online, and then you can go on a Wayback Machine and find that thing online. Like, there's always a way to get a hold of stuff. And so even though it's kind of I'm struggling to find Trigun in a legal way, that doesn't mean that I can't find Trigun. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly, yeah. And it's interesting to see how many reboots and stuff there are that aren't even... So even if we talked about Disney, we're going away from... the anime and stuff, but you're getting reboot after reboot after reboot, with some are, I guess, good changes to story, where they're removing problematic elements or whatever from the original versions. Like, there's a Peter and Wendy reboot coming out, a TV show, I think it is, on Disney Plus, where they have, as far as the trailer, they seem to have made some effort to make the Native American stuff a hell of a lot less problematic. I haven't seen anything more than just like a minute trailer though, so I'm going based off that. I don't know, but one would hope that in the year 2023 that people would try to make that less problematic, but at the same time, why don't we just write other stories? Why do we need to take a story that was in and of itself, it's a childhood story, I guess, but has very problematic and racist story. It's an old story, very problematic and racist elements within it, as well as other elements that you're just like, that's not great. Why don't we move away from it? Why do we have to have another version of it? And I suppose this comes down to the same question of why things like Roald Dahl, why are we editing Roald Dahl rather than just being like, we could just let that die and we could have new things? But I think the answer to that is probably capitalism, and so...
Yes. There's also, I think, things like Peter Pan and Pinocchio, which I'll mention, because that was another recent reboot that I loved. But
was that the
the Guillermo del Toro one,
yeah, so
which I know
great.
isn't technically it's a retelling, I guess, but we'll get into that.
There is a Disney reboot of Pinocchio, which is terrible.
Yeah. But those things are derived from. So there's the book Peter Pan. In case people don't know, it's a book. And the same thing with Pinocchio. It's a story that is written that you can go to, and so I sometimes feel like anything like any of those are in essence a reboot, but in a different media. Is basically what it is.
Yeah.
And I liked the fact that in Pinocchio, as an example, the Guillermo del Toro one is creepy. Because the story of Pinocchio is creepy.
Yeah.
And I think he even said, like, Pinocchio was one of the first horror stories that he watched as a kid. Like, the fact that he saw that as horror, even the Disney version, it was like, yeah, because it's a scary, creepy story. Yeah. So someone retelling it in a way that demonstrates these elements of it, I think is really cool. That's something that I would hope they could do to Peter Pan. Because the original story of Peter Pan is that Peter sucks. You're not supposed to like Peter. Like, he's supposed to be terrible. He's supposed to be scary. He's supposed to be a figure that you dislike and distrust. So the kind of Disneyification of it to make it something that is light and nice kind of strips a lot of that away. And I would be really interested in a Peter Pan that plays into the original themes.
Yeah, and I wonder whether that's the case with a lot of these reboots, remakes, whatever, is that they're trying to make them more palatable to a more general audience. That you can share it with people who don't necessarily have the same... They haven't read the book, so they don't know it's creepy, or they are from different age ranges, so you want to be able to give it to as many different people as possible. And I wonder whether that is some of it, that it's like, actually, if we make this, we don't just have one target demographic for it, we have 5. You lose some of the, I don't want to say integrity of the story, because that's not what I mean, but like, you lose some of what the story initially has in the fear, in the horror, in the complicated storytelling, all that kind of stuff, because you're trying to be like, but we have to target this person, this person, this person, this person, and not just the people who initially would be into that.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether that's part of it, and actually, rather than, if we go back to the anime thing, rather than it being like, oh, we're targeting people who are outside of Japan, it's more, we're targeting as many people as possible, and that includes these people who like this specific thing, and that does well, so let's try and put that type of storytelling into this so more people will watch it. Potentially.
I think, because especially Trigun storytelling, but that kind of genre in anime, and I think even that time frame in anime, had a lot of just like, we're just going to accept that this is what's going on in the world, and we're not going to explain anything, and it can be a little confusing. I remember not really fully understanding what some of the mechanics were that they were talking about in the world, but you just kind of let it go. And I can understand how some people might really be turned off by that.
Yeah.
And so in the reboot, they're like overly explaining everything. But I think when you overly explain the mechanics of a world, you kind of need to have a figure that's new to that world to explain it to without it. So it doesn't seem like... But in this one, it's like everyone's there and knows it. But he's talking to, of course, the woman to say, let me explain to you how our world works. And it's like, fuck off, dude. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's really bad. But like, it's interesting because you still have anime like Full Metal Alchemist, which I don't think ever really explains how anything fucking works. And even Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, which is actually, it's not a reboot or a remake. It's essentially, the original anime was made before the manga was finished, so they gave it a different ending. And so Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood is actually just telling the story of the manga with the correct ending.
Yeah.
So like all the other stuff at the beginning, like the first half of it that matches up pretty much exactly to the original anime and the manga, because they're telling the same bit, and then it changes for the second half because you then have the rest of the story. And I actually really like the fact that in Brotherhood they still don't really explain things.
Yeah.
They're like, it just is. Some of this stuff is just is, and you know, we give some explanation about how it works, but not loads. And I quite enjoy that it's never fully over-explained, because I don't want it to be like, I feel like a lot of people kind of go, oh, but we understand how our world works, and I just have to sit there and be like,
no, you don't.
No, we don't. Like, some scientists might understand more than some others of us, but most people just existing in the world kind of just go, yeah, physics, cool.
So
awesome.
as an anthropologist, my job is to harass people with questions until they get annoyed with me. And it's typically on how things work. Like, oh, you're getting dressed in a different outfit when you go to work than when you stay at home. Why is that? The number of times that you kind of push on a question and people respond with, oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, people don't really know. But also I can kind of understand though how some people get turned off by not knowing, and they get kind of caught up in, but I don't understand. And so I get it. And so I get trying to cater to that, but then it ends up just having a very different feel to it.
Mm-hmm. Like, I'm somebody who, shockingly, I've never talked about this before on the podcast. I love the Cthulhu Eldritch mythos. And a large part of that is because you have no fucking idea what it is. Understand. The whole point is that you should not understand it. You do not want to understand it. And I love that because it gives that thing of humans really, really, really want to learn how it works. They want to know, and they're so curious. And the curiosity often just ruins it. In the case of Cthulhu mythos, to drive you mad and want to kill everybody, or yourself, or any other horrible thing that might happen in those books. Sometimes you kind of go, maybe we've over-explained this to a point where that ruins the story. Like, you don't need to know everything, because actually not knowing sometimes increases the enjoyment and increases the fear factor or the excitement factor, or just the general kind of thing of, if we info dump on you about how this all works, you're suddenly going to lose half of what is mysterious or interesting about the storyline. And that is one of the things that I felt with particularly the Trigun reboot, but also I felt with other reboots. There's a Digimon one that does it as well, and I'm just like, no. I'll tell you the reboot that did work is the Sailor Moon reboot, actually. That was quite good, because they just cut out a lot of waffle. They're like, we'll keep some of the filler, but quite a lot of the filler's gone, so we'll just have the main storylines, which I enjoyed. So, it does mean you lose a bit of the silliness, but it was quite nice to have the...
I haven't seen that one.
Is it called, like, Crystal or something? Or is that Card Captors? I don't know. Magical girl animes have similar titles. But the other thing is we're seeing a lot of people doing continuations rather than necessarily reboots. And I'm okay with that. I don't mind a continuation, because it's just like, oh, look, there's more of it. That's exciting. And if I don't like more of it, that doesn't change the thing that came before. Nor the reboots.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think that's... Because that happens a lot with reboots, like... whenever they make some new version of a thing that has women in it or gay people in it, then everyone goes, oh, you've ruined my childhood, and it's that kind of thing. And it's like, the old thing still exists, and you still had those... It's like we were talking about with the tattoos. It's like, that doesn't go away. Like, you still have these memories, and you still have these attachments to that piece of media as it existed then. Just because there's now a new piece of media that other people... And I'm sure, like, because I've seen people... I've been on Twitch a lot lately, and I saw some people in chat talking about how much they enjoyed the Trigun reboot. And I wasn't going to go in there and be like, you guys are wrong, because that's just a terrible thing to do. But also, like, they're allowed to like it, and I'm glad that there are more people who might now go back and watch the old one because they didn't know about it until the reboot came out. And they'll see the differences, and they can choose for themselves which one that they liked, and make their own memories and attachments to things the way that they want to.
Exactly, and I have to say, I'm really enjoying seeing a lot of people coming to these characters that I have loved for a very, very long time. Like, I talk about Bash. Bash is one of my dream cosplay characters, and I am sad that I'm short. So now I'm like, yay! But, like, he has been one of those characters that's lived in my head rent-free for a very long time, and probably has informed quite a lot of how I write, with that sort of silly, goofy, everything's fine until it's definitely not, but I'm still going to manage to quip at you through the whole situation. I do think that I'm really glad that people are coming to see these characters and coming to kind of find these stories, even if it's not through the same way that I did, and even if I have my own issues with parts of the storytelling or character choices and character development. I'm like, I think this was better in the original version, but that's my opinion, so that's fine. And like I said, they're doing a second series, which will apparently be the story of the original anime, so we'll see what they do with Millie and Meryl, and whether that actually kind of, I don't want to say fixes, because that's not what I mean, but like, it kind of brings them back to be the characters that they were, and that'll be fun. But I also kind of really want to start seeing, I would love to see places like some of these companies kind of bring out more unusual storytelling things. And maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm missing those things at the moment because they're just not in my sphere of influence, which could very definitely be the case, that the popular stuff that we're seeing just isn't those unusual ones. I have to say, I really enjoyed Mob Psycho. Was it 100, 1000? Yeah, that I really enjoyed. It's so damn bizarre. So strange. And I have just started watching Stories of a House Husband. The one about the retired Yukasa. That's very funny, and I'm enjoying that very much. So there's definitely some brilliantly odd, interesting pieces of storytelling out there. And I'd like to see more of it. I'd like to see more of it become popular. I'd like to see more of it become mainstream.
This will be a little bit of an insight into the type of anime that my husband likes. But we've been watching Kaguya Love is War.
What is that?
It's like a high school romance one,
okay.
But the idea is that it's like each episode is like 3 or 4 different little like vignettes, and the whole thing is that the 2 main characters definitely are in love with each other, but they are in a war to see who confesses first, because that person loses.
Oh my god, I want to watch that.
And there's like a little vignette, and at the end it'll be like, oh, who won? Like, what's the result of today's battle? You know, and they have like the narrator is like really over the top, and the animation is sometimes very over the top in the way that like they, you know, move and respond to things.
That's so excellent.
But yeah,
I want to watch that. Sounds great.
It's really good. But we watch, like my husband watched a lot of it. Like I think it's on like season 3 or something. And so we're now going back and watching season 1 with me. But he watches a lot of those like slice of life and kind of chiller, less shonen-y kind of animes. But I'm normally a big shonen person. Like I love that, like, I mean, give me a fairy tale any day of the week. Like, like I love the over the top. I love the I can beat you physically in a fight purely through the power and magic of friendship. Like I you know, it's stupid, and I like the fact that it's a bit silly and stupid and campy, and I enjoy that.
So I feel like I'm going to tell you because my favourite anime are Haruhi Suzumiya, which I think says a huge amount about me, and Magica Modica, which I also think says a huge amount about me as a person. I went, I like shoujo, but make it really fucking strange. That's what I want out of anime.
We've had this conversation before, but you listed a couple of your favorite anime, and I went, you should just hang out with my husband. Like, because his favorite anime is also Mushishi.
My baby boy.
I know.
Yes. This is it. I think that maybe it's just been my perception of anime for the last few years, because I think I definitely, in sort of around 2015, 2016, I got really turned off anime, because every time I tried to watch something new, it would just be cheesecake and fan service and boobs moving without gravity and shit like this, you know? And I'd just be there like, every time I'd be recommended something, or it'd be like, oh, that looks good, or whatever, it didn't even matter what the storyline was. It would just be there. And I was just like, I'm not really super comfortable with this. And it was kind of like, eh. And so I stopped watching, which means I'm very out of the loop now, coming back into things now that I've, you know, and there doesn't seem to be anywhere near as much as that. Like, it does seem to have been a trend for a couple of years and then gone away, which is good. Because as much as I think that sort of stuff has always been present in a lot of pop culture, it's not just anime. It's a lot of pop culture. Yep. There was definitely like a real big spike in it in that sort of mid 2010s period for some reason. I wonder whether it was like a backlash against people wanting things to change. I don't know. I don't know.
But I think one of the problems with anime is that it's hard to get into. It's kind of one of those, it's hard to get into and it's hard to stay on top of, because you kind of mostly hear about the big ones, and if you're not a big fan of those ones, then it's hard to find out. Like, the only reason why we knew about that Inspector show is that me and Tom used to listen to an anime podcast, and then we got tired of it, so we stopped listening to it, and so we kind of have to just scroll around on Crunchyroll and hope we see something that is decent, you know? But it's hard because we both don't really... I mean, as much... I'll watch a shonen, and shonens tend to have a lot of the sexualization stuff going on. It just is. But, like, that's not what he's into. So if we're going to watch a show together, it can be sometimes really difficult to find a thing. So we've been watching a lot of those kind of slice of life stuff. And I think the other thing is when you find out a lot about a bunch of stuff through cons, and I find out about a lot of pop culture recently from hanging around with cosplayers. And so I'll see what someone's cosplaying and I'll go, oh, let me look into that. And then maybe I'll watch that show. Yeah. But, like, you're not going to cosplay just a random Japanese schoolgirl. Like, it would just look like you're wearing clothes. Which I'm sure people do that, you know. But, like, the Sailor Moon is that to an extent where you can tell that it's Sailor Moon. And so that's typically where you would gravitate towards, is I think people tend to cosplay the more shonen-y type
There's a lot more going on, yeah, absolutely. Like, and I think particularly if you're kind of trying to get in, I can see this being very similar with if you're coming from the other side and trying to get into, say, the expansive universe that is Star Wars or Star Trek or any of this stuff. Like, it's nowhere near, because obviously manga and anime are a genre of they're genres of, they're not genres, they're mediums. What am I talking about? They're mediums in and of themselves with genres in them, right? Whereas, like, a lot of, if you were like, okay, it'd be the same as going, I really want to get into sci-fi, where do I start with all the sci-fi? Yeah. What would you do, you know? So you do, and then you're given Star Wars, which is an extensive, huge thing in and of itself, and then you're like, okay, so all sci-fi is like this, and then you're given Star Trek, and it's completely different. Like, that's the thing with anime and manga. It's like, cool, I like the medium, it's very cool, very pretty, I like the art, I like the way it's created, I like the reading style, all that kind of thing. And then you're like, oh, but this other one that I've picked up is completely different in, you know, its genre to the last one I read. And I think, like, unless you have, like, obviously Crunchyroll is really helpful, and thank goodness we have it now. We're not just having to illegally steal anime off the internet. But unless you have, like, a directory or recommendations, or, like you said, go to cons and see people cosplaying as things and, like, this is something I really want to see because it looks pretty, you're going to struggle finding anything. And I do think that I would very much hold my hands up to being the person who was in that place for a long time, and I have only just started finding ones that I'm like, oh, okay, this matches the weirdness filter that I like. It doesn't have any of that stuff that I'm not interested in. Okay, we're back in the game. But it's taken a long time to get there because what I've seen and what has been popular and what has been online and what people I know have been talking about has just been stuff that I'm not interested in. And so you then kind of, I guess for ease, you kind of just write off the whole thing as like, which isn't fair, nor should you do that, but you just kind of go, okay, cool, but it's easier for me, I understand the sci-fi, so I'll just go and look at all the sci-fi, you know, or you're more likely to be able to go and look through stuff in a Waterstones, though I would say probably pretty much all bookshops now have a pretty decent graphic novel and manga section, which is good. Yeah. And I would say a lot of it, again, is that more stuff's getting translated. That a lot more stuff, a lot more different stuff, because there is a, you know, there is an interest in a wider audience, and an acknowledgement that there is a wider audience for certain things, that we're starting to see more and more translations coming through companies who are collaborating across different countries, which is great. So maybe that's it. Maybe we've just had to come through a little bit of a, oh my goodness, what was going on? And then suddenly it's like, oh cool, there's loads of stuff. This is great. Because there definitely was a time where I was like, I only see like the shonens on the shelf. You know, that was all I could get hold of, unless I went to a specialist manga bookshop, like, and they're few and far between. I feel like I'm putting a lot of my own bias onto this, and I don't mean to. I'm just kind of explaining my experience of like this, and how I'm excited that I get to enjoy manga and anime again because I found the ones that I like, which is good. Yeah, so
it's definitely a rough thing to get into, and I think that's where reboots can sometimes be nice, to bring us back slightly on topic. Which is that it does allow people to find things that they might have not originally been able to find, because if you only know shonen because that's the only things that are on the shelf or the only things that you are being shovel fed by Crunchyroll, then you're going to be shovel fed that Trigun, and then you're going to find out it's a reboot, and then you're going to watch that old Trigun, and suddenly that opens up a different world of a different type of anime, and hopefully, anyway.
Yeah, one would hope. I would be interested to see whether the same happens with reboots of things like Disney stuff. Whether somebody being like, oh, you know, Pinocchio is a perfect example. There's the original Disney Pinocchio. There's then a reboot Disney Pinocchio, which is bad. Just bad. And then people might have gone, oh, but what's this other version, the Del Toro version that has done really well and won Oscars and stuff? Let me watch that. And then they're actually going to have an interest in like Pinocchio as a story, because Del Toro's retelling of it is so unusual, but also probably one of the closest to the original. So I would be interested to see if that is something that people actually do. They suddenly find they like a story better because they found a version of it that's telling that story in a way they can connect to.
Yeah.
I really liked that version of Del Toro's Pinocchio. I like that they had the rabbits. So few versions have the rabbits. The death really rabbits.
It was supposed to be a trilogy, like part of a thematic trilogy with Pan's Labyrinth and the Devil's Backbone.
That makes sense. You mean the fascism is bad trilogy?
Yeah. Yeah. We should do I've been slowly becoming more of a Del Toro fan throughout my years. And so maybe we should do an episode on that at some point.
Yeah. Some of it I wasn't able to watch Cabinets of Curiosity. That was too heavy on the graphic horror for me.
Like, yeah, because I think only the first one was actually Del Toro. The other ones were people that he had just selected to present.
So that one I found a little bit, I couldn't watch that. But I love Pan's Labyrinth. It's one of my favourite films of all time. It's great. And I love the Hellboy films. They're also brilliant. So, you know... They're ridiculous. I also like the definitely not a Hellboy film that is Shape of Water. The Abe Sapien love story film. Do you know what else I would be really interested to see? Is the thing of reboots that aren't really reboots, where people are kind of bringing stuff back. Like, I went to see the Dungeons and Dragons movie. And obviously there was kind of a Dungeons and Dragons thing in like the 80s, 70s and 80s, and TV shows and all that kind of stuff. And I don't think it's not a reboot, it's just there is a Dungeons and Dragons movie now. But it's obviously harking back to a nostalgia and on a modern popularity of the Dungeons and Dragons thing, which I think is quite interesting because that movie does a lot of callbacks to stuff that you'd only really know if you were in any way interested in the original Dungeons and Dragons TV show or like that very early kind of movies and stuff from like the 80s. So that kind of playing on people's nostalgia for things.
Yeah, I mean,
there's definitely a thing, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what the reboots, I think, are all about, isn't it? It's getting someone to be like, oh, you watched Trigun when you were 15 and getting into anime, why don't you watch it again in this new version? Come back to Crunchyroll and watch Trigun.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what it is, because I know that I was definitely excited about it because I love Trigun and I have that nostalgia for Trigun and I was really connected to Trigun. But then I think there is that weird level with nostalgia that I think Nintendo really struggles with, but somehow sometimes manages to get right, which I don't know.
Yeah.
Which is that it's hard to replicate something that isn't based on what it is, if that makes sense. So, like, for example, Ocarina of Time looks like dog shit now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So if somebody tried to replicate Ocarina of Time based off of what it actually is presented to you, it would feel and look really different than what I remember it being like to play for the first time.
Yeah.
And that's a really difficult thing to capture, because also that's going to be slightly different for everybody who experienced it the first time. So if you're trying to reboot something like Trigun and capitalize on that nostalgia of Trigun, you kind of have to do something like they did by making it completely different. Because otherwise it's going to be that weird uncanny valley of it's being too close to the original while not being what I remember from the original, even though it's basically the original.
Yeah, and when you say that though, I opened this by saying I've just finished playing Resident Evil 4. And while I say there were some things that I missed from the original, and I know why they weren't there, and they're mostly not there because of budgetary reasons, which is like, oh, that sucks. They actually did it in such a way that I felt that it added to the original game because it gave you more lore, it gave you more stuff, but it didn't change the story. Almost every single element is, you can at least be like, oh, we're moving into the, it feels the same, but with updated character development, updated story elements, updated graphics, all that kind of stuff. But it also doesn't feel like they completely went, but we're just going to do it. We're just going to transpose the same things together. It feels like a different thing.
Yeah.
While also being very loyal and I don't know. It just felt like,
it was because it's something that's very difficult to do, but people have done it. And like I said, I think Nintendo
We won't talk about Resident Evil 3.
I think
that one was less good.
Nintendo has at times hit on this properly and at times kind of failed at it. And I think that's the case for a lot of different companies. Disney's definitely done that too, where there have been reboots that they have done that have been really good and have been very successful and have achieved the things that are hitting these. And then there are ones that are The Lion King. So it's... So, it's not always successful, even within the same company. Yeah. But it's just a difficult thing to capture, because you're trying to replicate a feeling in the audience, which is not something that is as easily transcribable as the media itself.
Yeah. And it's very hard with nostalgia, I think, to capitalize. People will be like, oh my god, is that thing? But you also have that thing of it will never feel like the first time you play something or the first time you watch something. You can't ever have that feeling again. You can have a different feeling, the feeling of like, oh, I remember this. But it's hard to ever replicate that feeling of like, oh, this is so exciting and something different's going to happen around that corner. That's only going to happen with new things.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like, as much as I understand the wanting to capitalize on the nostalgia element and having a million other Mario games, surely sometimes there needs to be space for newer franchises to start, or new franchises in general to kind of come out. Like, I would say the things that I've been most excited about recently have been things that I'm like, this is new and exciting, I haven't seen this before, this is cool, rather than necessarily... And I say that within older franchises as well. Like, I really like that... Ollie's going to talk about Star Wars again now. This is your warning. I like that Star Wars as a show, well, the shows as a franchise, even, that, again, not all of them hit the mark. Like, the last series of The Mandalorian was interesting. But there are things within that, so I know the universe, and then every so often they go, but we're going to give you a new whole bit of this universe that you've never met before, and here's some new stuff, and you get, and it's like, that's so exciting, because it's adding to the old thing, but it's got that feeling of the new. It's like, oh, so there's both things at once? Wow. And I think probably you can only do that within, like, major franchises.
Yeah, I think, basically you're saying, once again, that you like fan fiction.
Yeah. But no, yes. Maybe I've just outed myself. No, it's fine. Damn it! Don't. I like read when me people
take an existing canonical story and just put their own spin on it in their own way.
But also, I could just have new things too. I guess I could have new things. It'll be fine. Yeah, new things. It won't be scary or anything. My anxiety won't get annoyed about that.
One day I should have on this podcast a friend of mine named Chris Deasy. He's an academic. He's one of the sweet old men of the academic world. And he specializes in nostalgia.
Oh, that's an exciting thing to specialize in.
Yeah, and film. And I'm not a film person, so it's always fun to... He gets very annoyed with me that I'm not a film person whenever we chat.
It's okay. I'm a film person. It's fine. He can talk to me.
Yeah, but maybe it would be fun to have on somebody that can talk nostalgia much more eloquently.
Than me being like, I maybe like canonical fan fiction,
especially because I was sitting there and I was like, oh yeah, I could bring up all this stuff about nostalgia that like Chris Deasy does, and I'm like, sorry, Chris. Sorry, Chris, that I don't remember. But he approaches everything from a religion perspective, because all of my friends are religious studies people. Talks a lot about, like, radio shows and, like, old media and how people feel about it and how it has this kind of reverence to it, which, is the religion connection.
But I think it comes back to that thing with the validity that we've talked about on multiple occasions, that people treat things like Shakespeare with like reverence and validity and all this sort of stuff, and you're like, but it's just kind of the same as all this other stuff because it's old, right? Because it's lasted, and because people have a nostalgia for it, and so it's treated with more respect. And I also think that's why people do get angry about reboots, or they do get kind of that knee-jerk emotional reaction about things where they're like, but it's not the same as when I was a kid, and it's because they want you to have they want the thing that they liked as a kid to be treated with that kind of how they treat it, they want to, and it's been changed and it's different, and therefore it's not as good. And I think it probably all comes back to that same thing of like, what is valid media, what is what is the thing that it's okay, and even as an adult you're like, I like this and that's fine because I liked it when I was a kid or whatever. I don't know, I'm going in circles with this, but there definitely does seem to be that feeling of, with all of this, that it's about nostalgia, and it's about how do we kind of convince people to watch the thing again, and how do we make it that people don't get cross about it. But of course they will.
They're always going to get cross about it.
Oh,
I mean, it's why people really didn't like a lot of what I have to say about popular culture as a myth academic, because basically my whole thing, for people who don't know, is that popular culture is our contemporary mythology, because it's just the stories that we're telling now, and we told stories before and we're telling stories now, and that's just the stories we tell. And
you are correct in this. No, but that's not how academia works.
It's one of the many reasons why I left was always, whenever I would talk to people like you or my other friends or people outside of academia, and I would kind of mention this, and people would go, yes! And then I would talk to an academic and they'd go, really?
It's almost like attitude. Comic books are American mythology, and they created gods and superheroes for themselves to be there. Yeah, like, that's so fucking obvious.
But it is that thing of what made something like the Norse gods something that we can call mythology is that they're old.
Yeah.
And we can look at them as something that has lasted a long time. But I think sometimes understanding how stories work can sometimes paint this. Like, the fact that Trigun is still in the public consciousness. How many years since it initially aired?
20 years.
Like, I don't even want to think about how long it's been.
Well, because I don't know if we watched it when it initially aired.
Well, I mean, and obviously the initial airing in Japan's probably going to be different than for us. But yeah, I mean, I initially watched it, I don't even know how, because I have bad memory, but like, definitely quite young. Mm-hmm. And the fact that people are still, even before the reboot, we're still thinking about it, I think shows how powerful that story is. Yeah. Because there's also stories that have popped up and people have forgotten about it a year later.
Yeah.
And it's because that doesn't have the lasting power.
No.
But that even 10 or 15 years can show us a certain amount of lasting power in stories.
I think particularly with things like Trigun as well, particularly because it's, unlike a lot of anime and manga, it was a one-off story. It's one season, and that's it. There are some like additional bits and pieces that go around it. There are other versions of it and stuff. But a lot of the thing with anime and manga is that they're kind of more like soap operas. They're not entirely, but they're very ongoing, and they're often released chapter by chapter and all this kind of stuff because they're serialized in magazines, or they're things that are put on literally just as tiny little episodes on TV. I mean, a lot of people might have noticed that a lot of manga and anime even, often they only run to 20 minutes without ads. They're quite short. And it's because, like, they are a heavily serialized medium. And I wonder whether things like Trigun, because it came out in a period where that wasn't necessarily completely... Well, no, it was. There was serialization. That was very much always part of manga and anime. But it was clearly trying to tell a story in one way, and they were going to tell it all in this small period of time. And I wonder whether that's why the story lasted, is because it wasn't just an ongoing Dragon Ball Z forever, Ball, whatever they're called now. It didn't just go on and on and on with every, and Naruto, which has 400, 500 episodes?
Yeah.
And Trigun is 28, I think. 28 episodes. And it's definitely not more than that. That's really unusual for for something within manga and anime, or at least it is to those of us who aren't living in Japan, right? To see that the ones we get are the ones like Naruto or Sailor Moon or
Yeah.
whatever, where they have a long lot of things. And I wonder whether that is why Trigun, particularly,
Probably.
the story had to be so condensed and it had to be really told in a very like obvious way and done in this and all that kind of thing, that it became a piece of writing that was so well crafted that it really lasted. And I think maybe that is partially why the reboot might struggle, is because it's lost some of that very tight, very well thought out writing, because they're spreading it out over more than one series.
Yeah, you talking about that also made me think of Cowboy Bebop, another very powerful nostalgia driver in
Cowboy
anime.
Bebop has that, and Samurai Champloo has that, and there's a lot of anime that is that same period as Trigun, that kind of, I would say, late 90s period, early 2000s, that was much tighter. It wasn't doing the long running thing. Those other ones were existed at the same time. Obviously, Naruto has been popular forever. But then you also have things like Death Note, which I would say kind of come in the middle ground of that, which again is just an incredible piece of writing. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but Death Note actually is very good. Like, it's genuinely brilliant.
It's a cliche for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. It's just good, guys. You read it if you haven't. I would say read it rather than watch the anime. I think the manga gets the point across better. Don't know why. It just maybe that's personal preference. I really like the manga. In fact, I had the original manga. I don't know. When I was a teenager, and when I went to university and I was an idiot and needed money, I sold them, and now I regret that choice greatly, and so I'm now recollecting them. Like, get them back. These ones I should have kept.
I propose that the plural of manga would be mangoose.
I could get behind that. Mangeese? Yeah. I'm sure there is. I think manga just is the plural of manga.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know.
I like mangeese. I would keep that. And maybe I'm just old. Maybe I'm just
We're just
nostalgic
old, bitter people complaining about all these newfangled anime that's coming out.
How dare the shonen not be what I want?
Is this an insight of what it's going to be like when we're, like, in our 60s complaining about these newfangled things, but it's all going to be, like, anime and... Back in my day, anime used to be...
That's what this episode is being, guys. I'm so sorry.
I mean, I'm trying...
We're here being like, we're so academic, we talk about these subjects, we're so deep, and then this episode's just been like, reboots are shit. Like,
I see their purpose, and I think they're fine. I think that one isn't for me.
Yeah.
I've been watching season 2 of Ancient Magus' Bride, and I'm very excited.
I haven't watched series 1.
Oh, you should. It's getting up there to be my favorite anime, I think. It's getting there. It's not there yet, but it's up there, I think. And I realized a little bit too late in what I should have realized it, that a lot of what I like about it, not a lot of it, a portion of what I like about it is the fact that there's not a lot of hypersexualization for no reason.
Yeah.
There is a character that is hypersexualized, but that is a reason. There is a reason for it. They are a succubus. They are going to be hypersexualized. But, like, the main character is a woman, and she dresses very modestly and isn't shown off in certain ways, which I appreciate.
I think that was one of the things that I've always struggled with, is they're like, these people, these characters, whatever you said, they're not real. They're drawings, and so somebody made this choice to do that. So you didn't have to do that, did you? Like, you could still have a character fall over and not have an upskirt shot. Like, it'd be very easy to do that, you know? It's just drawing some different pen lines. Oh, well. I feel like I feel the same about American comic books, though, in that regard. I'm just guys.
It's just their culture, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Like, I feel, like I think I said this before, all pop culture is very, very...
Yeah.
They have done the thing, and they are very guilty of it. I think we should come to an end before we just moan about fan service in pop culture, which is not what we're meant to be doing. This has been really fun. It's actually the last episode we're recording, at least like this.
Yeah.
We're going to be in the same place next time. What the hell?
What?
What? Not in
person.
Oh my god. We'll only need one microphone. Oh.
God forbid.
And we'll only need one recording track. What?
I'm going to have to be a lot more careful about not talking over you because I can normally edit that out.
Maybe we'll record on separate tracks. No, it won't work. It will be really difficult to do.
No, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. I'll try not to be like my mother.
But I'm excited. I'm really excited to do that. And I'm also excited because we're actually going to talk about cosplay. We're going to do it. We're going to deep dive into a topic of cosplay because we're not going to do all of... That would be insane. We'd be here for hours. We're just gonna unpack all of cosplay in 1 hour slot.
You'll just have to read both of our books in order to
exactly
get the full story.
Oh my god. No, that's not even enough. You made me hit my desk and you're gonna have to edit that out. I'm so sorry. I got so frustrated I hit the desk.
Well, I'm looking forward to it.
It's gonna be super fun. I'm very
it'll
excited.
Be fun.
Yeah.
And this has been fun. This whole series has been fun.
I've really enjoyed it. I really hope that people listening to it have found it interesting and insightful and not just, what the fuck are you guys doing?
Maybe a little bit of that. I like a little bit of that.
Yeah, no, some of that's fine. And I hope that, the one thing I would really like is, before we go into recording series 2, is that anybody listening to this who's been enjoying it could send us a message with a topic that you would like us to cover. Yes. That would be really cool, because there's so many things out there that we don't know about, or we'd like to research about, or that we would love to hear your opinions on. So yeah, it would be awesome. So
send us pictures of your lovely objects.
Exactly. Get in touch with us. All our social media is all linked in all of the bios and the show notes and all that kind of thing. And you've got to remember to give us a like and a subscribe and all that stuff they say on the YouTubes. And send us to your friends if you think they'd like our waffling, because it's good waffle, It's a great waffle.
It's like a waffle with like a quality maple syrup on it.
Oh, and like really crispy bacon. Good shit. Anyway, I've been Holly Swinyard, and next time I will be in person Holly Swinyard, which will be great.
I've been Vivian Asimos, and I will be only half in person. I'm always half in spirit.
And you've been listening to I'm a Fan of That, a podcast about fan culture. Bye!
Bye!
Oh my god. Thanks for listening. Remember to like, review and subscribe wherever you listen to this podcast, and do give it a share. Tell your friends, family and fellow fans and get the word out. You can follow us on social media, links in the show notes, as are some links to further reading. Who doesn't like a reading list? We are nerds after all. Music for this episode was Nowhere Land by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons Attribute 3.0. This episode was produced by Vivian, Asimos and Holly Swinyard.